Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have filmmaker Andrew Durham with us today. We'll chat with Andrew in just a moment. But first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please follow or subscribe and rate and review, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So Andrew Durham is a graduate of the USC School of Cinema and Television. He has worked under such directors as David Lynch, Christopher Guest, Wes Craven, and Oliver Stone. He began his collaborative relationship with Sofia Coppola when he produced her first short film, Lick the Star, and Coppola's television series HI-OCTANE for the Comedy Central network. He went on to work for MTV Networks as producer for projects in development, and later for Fox Television Studios, where he served as vice president of production. He left television to pursue his passion for photography. He's shot for such publications as Vanity Fair, the New York Times, French Vogue, and Elle, and advertising campaigns for Louis Vuitton, Marc Jacobs, and Dior. And he's in the back room to discuss his feature film directorial debut, FAIRYLAND, which is currently in select theaters nationwide and headed to video on demand next month. Andrew, welcome into the back room.
Thank you, Andy, for having me. Andy, first of all, are you an Andy or an Andrew? I'm guessing you're an Andy, right?
I'm definitely an Andy, but people call me Andrew, people call me Drew. I'm like,
yeah, I get a lot of Drew.
Yeah, Drew's actually kind of cool. I like that. A nice little variation.
Yeah.
Really looking forward to talking with you about your film, Fairyland. To say it's a truly beautiful film is really a gross understatement. It left me a weeping mess towards the end. And as I had mentioned to you in an email, my late wife, Adrienne, died when our daughter, Sophie, was not quite 3. She's 21 now. So the film really resonated with me on a deeply personal level. So huge congrats to you on making this terrific film.
Thank you very much. I'm so happy that the film resonated with you. It seems to have, it's been having a bit more of a universal appeal than I had anticipated. So that's very fulfilling as a filmmaker. You know, you have I made this movie because I loved the memoir, and I could relate to the story on some personal levels. And I was always told, you know, write what you know, make what you know. Mm-hmm. And again, the memoir was so beautiful, but I did feel at the time, oh, this is probably a pretty niche story, and perhaps it won't be as like I said, have as much universal appeal. But speaking to people like you and so many people, not only from the initial film festival circuit that we did with the film, but also now that it's in release, people have been reaching out, and it's really hit a nerve with some people that I wasn't expecting. So that as an artist is always quite gratifying. You know, you're not working in a vacuum all the time, and it's not something that's very sort of self-serving, that you do have something you want to share with the world and people can relate to it. So
well, you
thank
mentioned,
you for saying that.
Of course, you mentioned the memoir. The film is based on Alicia Abbott's memoir about growing up with her gay father in the 70s and 80s in San Francisco.
Yeah.
What first drew you to this story, and why did you feel it was a story you wanted or perhaps needed to tell?
I wasn't aware initially of the memoir when it came out. It was our producer and a very, very dear friend of mine, Sofia Coppola, who the book was sent to her. And I don't know if it was sent to her before, you know, people like Sofia, they get galleys and things like that. You know, they get books before they come out. But I think it had come out because I remember Sofia was really excited she loved the cover. There's a fabulous photograph on the cover of the book. And it's young Steve and very young Alicia standing in Golden Gate Park, and they're in sort of these turn of the century, which I'm assuming just thrift store clothes they bought. And it's in front of a old monument in San Francisco, and it has sort of this looked like the photo could have been taken, like I said, around the turn of the century or something. It's a black and white image, but it was taken in the 70s when they were hippies. So there was something multi-layered about the image and quite American Gothic that I think Sofia really loved. And so she read the book and she read the memoir. I think Alicia Abbott, who wrote the memoir, was hoping that Sofia would adapt it into a screenplay and direct it. Alicia Abbott is a big fan of Sofia's work. So I think that's what she was really hoping for. Anyway, Sofia and I have had a collaborative relationship for many years. We've known each other since the early 90s and made short films together and lots of art projects, and we still collaborate today. And she read the book and she sent it to me and she said, you know, this story was sent to me and it's a beautiful book and I love it, but knowing your sort of upbringing and what you experienced as a young person growing up in San Francisco, just so you know, Andy, I also grew up with a gay dad around the same time that Alicia Abbott did. Situations were a little different. My parents got divorced when I was about 10 years old. My dad moved to San Francisco. My brother and I stayed with my mom down in the suburbs on the peninsula. And so I wasn't really raised by my dad in the sense that Alicia was. But I was raised by a single parent, my mom, my brother and I, and we would spend our weekends with my dad and his friends. So I knew that world that Alicia was describing in the book quite well. And so when Sofia read the book, she said, I think this is probably your story to tell more so than mine, which is a generous thing for an artist to do. And so that's how, to answer your question, that's how, you know, I came across the book. It was a gift from Sofia. She read it. She thought I could tell this story with probably bringing some of my own experiences and a little bit more honesty and truth to the story. And then we had to convince Alicia Abbott, who I think was expecting Sofia to make this film. And we flew out to Boston, where Alicia lives with her husband and her kids. And we sat down with her. And I think at first she was a little taken aback because there was Sofia, who she was so excited about. But then here was this guy who's never made a movie before. I'm a photographer. But after about a 3-hour meeting on a snowy afternoon in November, she heard my story and she understood that she would probably be in good hands, hopefully. I mean, she took a risk. And so that's how it ended up with me.
Wow, that's a great story. And so a central theme in Fairyland is the father-daughter bond. How did you balance the personal intimacy of that relationship with the broader social and political backdrop that's clearly in the film?
Well, again, the memoir is so well written and it's so personal, and it's and I love it because it is a memoir, so it's written from Alicia's point of view, and we've seen this era told before in books and TV and in movies. We've seen this story of sort of the gay lib movement of the 70s and 80s. And the AIDS epidemic. We've seen that story told, but I had never seen it told from a child's point of view before. And that's something that really, really struck me when I read the memoir, because there were so many of those things that you just see as a kid, and situations that you have with your parents as a kid, that I thought were so beautifully told in the book. And then on top of it, it was during this time, and it had this backdrop of all of this stuff that was happening in our country. So to answer your question about that, what I did is I just tried to stay true to the memoir. And in the film, I really focused on the father-daughter sort of interpersonal relationship, in the context, of course, of this time. But I just wanted to make sure that we stuck with them as the two driving characters. Somebody had written something about the film after they saw it at Sundance, which is still stuck with me, which I didn't really think about when I was writing it, or you know, even when I was editing it or anything or filming it. But they said this film the plot isn't driven by the character's actions, it's driven by time. And that was something that I guess I saw in the book, and it sort of sunk into me and it made its way onto the screenplay. But that sort of time and the changes that were happening in that backdrop in the world that Steve and Alicia were living in was really what was driving so many of their actions and so many of their choices and so many things. So that I just sort of let play out. And I instead just focused on their relationship. So what I did to adapt the book was I just went through Alicia's memoir, and I wrote down on little 3x5 cards every moment that I loved between the two of them. Just every sort of father-daughter moment, whether it was a moment of joy or a moment of conflict or, of anger, or frustration or fun. I just wrote them all down on little 3x5 cards from the time the book covers about a 15-year period. So does the film. And I just wrote those down on little 3x5 cards. And then I took all those cards and I sort of started piecing together the script based on those favorite moments. I had rented an apartment in San Francisco to work on the script, and it didn't, because I rented this apartment, didn't have any furniture, and I was only up there for a couple of months. So I had this big empty floor, and I would lay the cards down on the floor every day, and I would walk and I would look at them, and I tried to watch the movie by reading the little cards, and it was kind of fun. It's like a puzzle, and you put them together, and you put them in an order you like, and you build tension, and you find stuff that's redundant, and you get rid of that, and till finally you could see the actual movie with all these little cards of the moments between them. And that, to me, sort of really honored her memoir too, because a memoir is essentially sort of like it's like a patchwork of memories, and it's all these different memories we have. And so I just sort of found all the memories that shaped their relationship. And that's how I got the script. That's a really long answer to your question, but it was sort of my writing process and how I sort of focused on their relationship within the context of this backdrop of sort of what was going on in the world. But again, all of that was just sort of given to me because that was just all happening. Yeah. So I made sure that I just kept that sort of peppered in, whether it was, what was going on with the gay lib movement, or the Harvey Milk politics, or even just the shifting climate in a city like San Francisco from the 1970s to the 1980s, which was a huge theme in the story too. And then eventually to the AIDS crisis and how the city and the people dealt with it.
Yeah, well, the film deals with grief, identity, resilience, but it's also filled with, as you mentioned before, moments of joy and freedom. And it is so tonally perfect. But that happy, sad thing is not easy to pull off as a filmmaker, is it?
No, I think if you think about, happiness and sadness and all of that, and I think that problem that sometimes people make filmmaking is they try to make that so binary. They try to make it like, well, this is the happy moment, this is the sad moment. And they really lean into, joyous moments or really sad moments. And sometimes people tend to, I call it sort of putting ketchup on the tomato, which is like, okay, it's a sad scene, let's have sad music and show sad images. It's a happy scene, let's play happy music and happy images. And sometimes I find that just sometimes the contrast of those can be a lot more powerful. A happy image with sort of sad music, or a very sad image with sort of uplifting music can really strike a nerve sometimes. It makes you think, I guess. And that was something that happened to me when I was researching this time a little bit, going back. I mean, even though I lived this era, you grow up and you move on and you suppress stuff. And a lot of that research was not just going back into the archives of San Francisco and the archives of the gay lib movement, but just also going back and looking at my family's own photo albums and things like that. And there's a melancholy that happens, I think, as you get older and you start looking at, especially your parents, either their home movies or their photo albums, and you see these images and their sort of time has passed and people have passed on or they've aged, and those photographs of those joyous times can be sort of sad a little bit. Sure. I don't know if I'm articulating that right. And that was a tone that I tried to evoke a little bit in the film. I went through all of this. We couldn't really afford, we were a tiny budget movie, and we couldn't afford to hire lots of extras and big set pieces. So we shot everything in very tight frames. And then in scenes like the Pride parades, I would have to go through all this archival footage, which thank God there's so much of.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like amazing that so many people were shooting home movies of this stuff. And I would try to look for stuff that, one, sort of matched my cinematographer, matched her style and tone a little bit. I didn't want it to be too jarring when you looked at the archival footage.
Right.
So that was a job to find images that sort of matched what we'd already shot.
Mm-hmm.
But looking at so much of this stuff was so heartbreaking to me, especially in the context of what happened later on to those cities, and especially in the gay communities with HIV. It was just like, God, these are really obituaries, a lot of this footage. And there are people partying on the streets, and in costumes and getting wasted and having a great time. But when you look at it in this context, years later, so many of them are gone. And that I really wanted to show that in the film, when we cut to those scenes of those, specifically those Pride parades, that these were Alicia's memories of this time. And it was a little melancholy. So thank you for actually bringing that up about kind of tonally, the happy and the sad, because it is kind of it's a tough thing to do sometimes.
Yeah. Well, my late wife was a filmmaker, and she once said to me that, and she was great at pulling off the happy, sad thing, but she said, I write the way I live my life. I cry one minute, I laugh the next, and sometimes I'm crying and laughing in the same moment, in the same scene of my life, and that's how real people live. And I think it's interesting what you said about the compartmentalization of, okay, this is the funny moment, and now this is the sad moment, and that's not how people live. And in your film, there are moments where, I'm not going to give any spoilers, but moments of sorrow, but then there's a funny line that comes a second later, and people laugh, and that's what makes the on-screen bond between Steve and Alicia so authentic, because that's how real people live. That's how real people talk when real people are in a crisis. It's not just always sad, heavy shit. You can make a joke about the crap you're dealing with right now. And
totally. I mean, it's a part of a defense mechanism too. So things don't get too deep and too sad. We always like to,
cut the tension.
Add a little joke. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, the performances are truly incredible. They're tender, they're grounded, and the chemistry between Scoot McNairy and Amelia Jones is so palpable and really allows for a believable, layered father-daughter dynamic. I mean, Nessa Doherty as the child Alicia also delivers an incredible performance. Casting, I mean, a lot of people always say like writing is everything, but casting is pretty damn important too. And that chemistry just jumps off the screen. I mean, I really felt like I was watching a father and a daughter in various iterations throughout those 15 years, and not characters in a movie.
I really lucked out. I have to say, so much of it is, well, it's luck, and it's also going with your gut, I guess, because as I mentioned earlier, this was my first film, and I had again, another gift from Sofia was sort of the lessons I've learned from being around her and being on her sets and being a part of her process for decades now, and just understanding that you kind of always have to, rely on your gut. And I know that sounds abstract to people who probably don't work in the creative world, but you just feel something's right. And even though it's going against maybe what you've been advised or something, but all of the actors in this film were people that, Scoot McNairy, for example, I've always loved his work. He's not on everyone's radar, but he's just one of those guys that I just always thought was there was something about him that's just like, he's vulnerable, but he's kind of funny and sneaky, and he's a little naive. Just all of those things that when I read the memoir, Steve Abbott, I just thought, well, I don't know Scoot as a person, but I've seen him play this type of person, and it's a tricky kind of nuanced character because Steve is a flawed dad. He makes a lot of mistakes, but you have to love him, otherwise you lose the movie.
Right?
You can't. You're going to lose your audience right away if all of a sudden they're invested in 90 minutes to 2 hours with this guy they just don't like, who's making bad mistakes. And so the person just has to be lovable, regardless of how talented they are as an actor. They've got to be a lovable person. And Scoot just seemed like that. And I really, really wanted him for this. And I remember asking early on in this process if he was available, and he was shooting Narcos. So this is how long I've been trying to make this movie, because I think that was like season 2 of Narcos. So we're going back, I don't know how many years, but he wasn't available for like 9 months, they said, because he's down in South America shooting this, and then he's going to take some time off. And I said, well, I'm not going to wait 9 months. Andy, this movie took so many years to make that 9 months went by like that, So, and we'd had some wonderful, really talented actors kind of attached to this role, but it took so long for us to get our green light that they'd start disappearing after a while. They'd be like, Andrew, I got to take another movie,
Right.
So when that situation happened and I was without a Steve, I said, I'm going to go back to Scoot, and sent the script, and he read it immediately, and we spoke right away. And his enthusiasm for it was just so exciting to me, because I was like, well, here's the guy that was always in my gut that I just always thought should be the one to do it. So that box was checked. In the process of not having a Steve, I was meeting with a lot of young female actors to play teenage Alicia. This also took a while. And over the years, they kind of start to age out too. You're meeting these girls when, she has to play like 16 to 20, and you meet some of these girls when they're 18, they could pull off 16, but then by the time we start getting our green light, now they're like 22 or 23, and now I'm concerned. So,
right.
And something I've talked about before in this process with other conversations I've had with people is I didn't realize how few meaty roles there were for sort of like teenage girls. I was so surprised as a first-time filmmaker with this little low-budget movie, how the response from these women actors that were so excited to do a part that had a bit of meat to it. I can't tell me how many young girls I spoke to that were like, wow, I'm so glad it's like we're not just playing another stereotypical high school girl addicted to TikTok or something. It's
I mean, think about it. Like we had Juno 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Name another character like that since.
I mean, it was surprising. I didn't occur to me. I thought I had my finger on the pulse a little bit more than that, but it was like, wow, look at all of these amazing actors, and they're starring in their own TV shows, and they have all these movies and whatever, and they want to do my little tiny scrappy movies. So that was really another thing that was sort of exciting. I was like, good, I can really sink my teeth into figuring out who's going to be great for this. Amelia Jones just sent in an audition tape.
Wow.
I knew of her from a show she was doing on Netflix, but she was so young in that, or she seemed really young in that. She seemed like a little kid, but she sent in this tape, and she was just fabulous, and she was so natural, and I thought, oh God, well, she's exactly what I'm looking for. She doesn't feel like an actor, and her dialect, I didn't know at the time she was British either, because her tape was sent in and she did an American accent. But I also loved her dialect because of this is a period film, and you got to make sure that they don't sound too contemporary. There's a way that young people speak now that is just wouldn't land well if you were making a film about the 70s or 80s. So, and then I met with her online because it was in the pandemic, and that's when I discovered she was British. And I discovered a lot about her. She was British. She has a great sense of humor. She was so fun, so down to earth. And she also grew up with a grandmother, this fabulous grandmother of hers named Nan, we call her, who I've gotten to know during this process. And Nan lived with a lot of gay men. And Alicia, as a young girl, would spend her weekends with Nan and all these guys, and they would have these brunches and play disco music and have mimosas and like
kids love that.
Right? Yeah, they really do. Yeah. But so there was something about the story she could really kind of relate to and that environment. So that was another thing. I thought, well, this is great. She kind of gets it. She has really fond memories of that as a kid. So anything that an actor can bring, a personal thing like that, is really helpful. It makes my job just easier. So she was terrific. Little Nessa Doherty, we had to, that was sort of the last person to cast because, as I mentioned, Andy, this movie took so many years to make that there's no point in finding a 7-year-old who's going to be like 17 by the time you're shooting. So I had met with a lot of little girls. A lot of them had extensive actor training. That was not going to work for me necessarily. Again, I wanted a really sort of natural performance, and there was a dialect thing again. A lot of these young kids come in with this kind of speak that's sort of vocal fry or upspeak or something, and I wanted to. And little Nessa, a San Francisco native, grew up in the city, hadn't acted before. She did a lot of dancing, and I just fell in love with her. She's terrific, and her whole family are great. And when you're casting a child, you really want to make sure that you're in sync with the family because they're going to be around. And people always say you're not only casting the kid, you're casting the mom. So and this family of all, she's got siblings. Actually, her older sister plays one of the mean girls in the French school. And her mom was on set every day, I became her mom is my friend now. So it's like that kind of camaraderie when you're dealing with a child on the set, which you have to be so sensitive to so many things, and especially time and their attention span and all of that. But Nessa was so terrific, and she understood the tone of the movie right off from the very start, which was so sophisticated to me. I sort of got she knew to sort of hold back, and she knew this was based on a young girl's story, and it was all about the young girl's point of view. And Nessa did so much with her eyes and just looking around and observing, and she really got that. So
she was great.
So again, I lucked out. It was pretty much all luck.
You've said that as a child who grew up with a gay father and one dying of AIDS, that reading Alicia's book made you feel less peculiar and different. Has it been your hope that this film will serve as a similar source of comfort and inspiration for others, much in the same way her memoir has been for you?
Yeah, definitely. As I've said in the past a lot while talking about this film, when I was a kid, I think my brother and I felt like we were the only two people on the world with a gay dad. And it was like that not only when we were, when my parents came out when I was 10 years old, but it was like that through high school, college. It just wasn't shared by that many people.
Right.
And so gradually, bit by bit over the years, you start to discover, oh, your mom was gay, or oh, your dad was gay, but it wasn't until I read this memoir, and then Alicia, she also has a wonderful online community that she's a part of called the Recollectors, and that specifically is kids that lost parents to AIDS, and that turned me on to a whole community. And then this movie's taken me 10 years to make from the time we optioned the book till today. So that it's been in my world. And in the last 10 years during this process, all sorts of friends have come, people, high school friends. Oh, you went in high school, my dad was doing this too. And I would have to, a dear friend of mine that I was she was a few years younger than me, so she didn't really hang with our group in high school because she was like, you know, a sophomore when I was a senior, and you know how that works. But she still, I was friends with her, and we hung out together, and we were punk rockers together and stuff like that. But she told me at a recent screening of this film, you know, I can't believe that both of our dads at the same time, you know, when we were in high school, were having these kind of parties that we were going to as kids. And she would tell me she was the one that she was, you know, 12 years old, but she was making margaritas for all the guys and all this stuff. And, you know, and it's so, like, if we could have shared those stories in high school about our weekends with our dad and their friends, what a difference that would have made. Yeah. But you know what? I think that's not just a gay parent situation. You know, the older I get and the more high school reunions I go to, and all of the things that we didn't talk about in high school, that we were so many similar experiences that kids just didn't share because, you know, all of our insecurities. So I think it's not just that. I think it's a part of growing up. And what's wonderful about sort of where I grew up is I'm still really close with so many of my friends that I grew up with. I mean, I go to these reunions, and they're not just, you know, a 10-year reunion, 20-year reunion. They're reunions because we all went to elementary school and junior high and high school together. So there's quite a bond I have with these people, and we all are so comfortable talking about sort of our past now and all of this. And it's so, it's a really great thing to have. And I think I just hope that people don't always cut themselves off from their childhood or their high school friends when they go away to college. I know it's a big thing to reinvent yourself, but as an adult now, I've learned it's so important to maintain those relationships because it's a piece of the puzzle that helps make sense to so much in your life.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I'm still tight with my middle school friends. I'm tight with my high school era friends, and those friendships are the best. Last question. As audiences exit the theater, other than thinking, wow, what a great film, what do you hope they take away from Fairyland, especially younger audiences who didn't live through the 70s and 80s and the AIDS epidemic, but maybe navigating questions of identity and acceptance today?
Well, I mean, my dream is that it's not as difficult for them to navigate that anymore as much as it was probably, especially from my dad's generation. I mean, those men that sort of grew up in the 1950s, you know, that was what they did in the 1970s in that gay lib movement. That is an important part of history that hopefully especially young queer people that watch the film see that, and they realized sort of what sacrifices these guys made.
Yeah. Good point.
That's really, really important that they understand that, because everything that I know we're still, especially now, it seems like things are slipping backwards a little bit and things are complicated. It's nowhere near as difficult as it was for that generation. And again, the sacrifices that they had to make, not just sort of, you know, losing their families and stuff because they came out as gay, but then in the AIDS epidemic, when that came around, the medicine was so experimental. And we addressed that a little bit in the film. I have a scene in a pharmacy, which did not happen in Alicia's book. That was something I added because it was the conversation Alicia has with the pharmacist is an actual, almost verbatim, a conversation I had with my dad when I was concerned about some of the meds he was taking. Mm-hmm. I thought they were unproven, they were toxic, they were doing all these horrible things. And he said this, I'm not taking these for me, you know, I'm taking these for the next generation. Mm. We are guinea pigs. So that is a huge sacrifice that, you know, there's a lot of HIV medications that are out now, and a lot that people are taking. They need to understand the roots of those medications and where they came from. So hopefully that is something people take away. And then on sort of a broader, more universal note, I would hope that young people remember their parents were also young people. I think that's a really difficult, abstract thing sometimes. We now realize that the older we get, and maybe it's funny because, and I know we got to wrap this up, but I think when it's not until you're about 40 when you start looking back again, let's go back to the old photo albums and the home movies, and you start seeing your parents when they were younger than you are, you know, and then it takes to about 40 if you do the math on when people get married and have kids, and you start looking at images of your parents when they were young. And I think it's always important for young people to remember that, and that everything you as a teenager and all that you're going through, your parents went through that too. So it's not exclusive to just you. I think a generation gap is really just about sort of, to me, it just seems like a generation gap is about access to technology or access to whatever, you know, has come around since you were a kid. But I think people are people, and teenagers are funny and messy and crazy, and your parents were funny, messy, crazy teenagers. And I think that understanding that, and I hope that there's something in my story that shows parents and kids sort of connecting on a human level, and not so much just a parent-child level. I know that all sounds a little abstract, but
no, it sounds really simple. Your hope is that teenagers won't be so self-absorbed anymore. I get it. That's
exactly.
That's a very realistic dream. Again, the film is Fairyland. It's available in select theaters nationwide and on video on demand coming up next month in November. Andrew, thanks for coming on and talking about this incredible film. I really strongly urge people to go see it, and good luck with it. Come back and talk with us.
Thank you, Andy.
On your next project.
I love talking to you, and I love your podcast. You talk about a lot of very interesting things, and it's very engaging. So keep up the good work.
All right, thank you. Likewise. Take care.
Bye. Thanks.
This episode was produced and edited by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud for Radio Free Rhinecliff, with additional editing by Maddie Rosenberg, music by Andrew Hollander, and graphic design by Cricket Langell. And with a special thanks to our sponsor, The Epicurean. Again, thanks for listening. Please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to the Backroom with Andy Ostroy YouTube channel, where you can watch full videos of our interviews. See you next time.